The worst part wasn't the envelope, it wasn't even the name on it. The worst part was that my son, when I finally showed him, looked at the floor, not at me, at the floor. And I knew then that he had already seen it. I was 63 years old when my husband died. 41 years we had been married. 41 years of the same coffee pot, the same argument about the thermostat, the same side of the bed. You don't spend 41 years with a person and expect anything. That's the wrong word. You stop expecting because you stopped imagining that anything could still surprise you. You think you've read every page. His name was Leonard. Len. Most people called him. I called him that too after the first few years. He was a quiet man. Not called him that too after the first few years. He was a quiet man. Not cold. Just quiet. He kept things in order. Files labeled, shelves dusted, the garage arranged by season. He was the kind of man who balanced the checkbook by hand even after we got a computer. He didn't trust things he couldn't touch. I loved him for that once. Later, I stopped noticing it. That's what long marriages do. They make the extraordinary ordinary until you can't see it anymore. He had a heart attack on a Tuesday in March. He was 67. He had been fine at breakfast. Oatmeal, half a grapefruit, the newspaper folded to the crossword. I came home from my book club at 9 in the evening, and he was on the kitchen floor. The ambulance came. He was gone before I reached the hospital. That was the first shock. That kind always is. His office was a small room off the hallway. He had always kept it locked when he was alive, but I had the key. After the funeral, after the casseroles stopped coming and the sympathy cards stopped arriving, I went in to begin the process of sorting. You have to do that eventually. You have to open the drawers. He kept everything in hanging files, color-coded. Green for finances, blue for insurance, red for property, yellow for medical. I remember standing there thinking how like him it was. Even in his absence, everything was organized. Everything had its place. I was looking for the car title when I found it. It was in the red section, behind the house deed. A plain white envelope, not sealed, just tucked in. On the front, in his handwriting, 2 words. For Nadine. I didn't know anyone named Nadine. I stood there for a long moment. I told myself it was probably nothing. A work colleague. An old friend. Someone from his childhood I had never met. There were reasonable explanations. I told myself all of them before I opened it. Inside was a letter. 3 pages, handwritten. And folded behind the letter was a document. A deed. To a house and a town I had never heard of, 90 minutes from where we lived. The deed was in Len's name and a woman's name, Nadine Calloway. Dated 11 years ago. I read the letter standing up. I read it twice. Then I sat down on the floor of his office in the middle of all his neat color-coded files, and I didn't move for a very long time. He had met her in 2003, the letter said. That was the year I went back to work full-time. The year our younger son graduated high school. And the house went quiet in a way I hadn't expected. Len and I had struggled that year. Not dramatically. We didn't fight. We weren't cruel to each other. But we had moved through the rooms of our house like 2 people who had forgotten why they were there together. I remembered that year. I remembered it very well. The letter was not an apology exactly. It was more like an explanation he had written for himself. He said Nadine was a woman he had met through a professional conference. He said things had become something he hadn't planned. He said he had tried to end it twice and hadn't been able to. He said the house was hers because she had put her own savings into it and because he had wanted her to have security. He said he had loved me. He said that right there in the letter, and I almost laughed. What stopped me was the next sentence. The boys know. I told them in 2019. I didn't want them to find out the wrong way after I was gone. The boys. Our 2 sons. My sons. He had told them. 4 years ago. They had known for 4 years and had said nothing. I want to say I called them immediately. I want to say I was so strong and so direct that I picked up the phone that very night. But what I actually did was put the letter back in the envelope, put the envelope back in the red folder, and close the office door. Then I went to the kitchen and made a pot of coffee I didn't drink. I sat at the table until almost 2 in the morning. Then I went to bed. I didn't sleep. I spent the next 3 days pretending I hadn't found it. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to decide what I felt before I decided what to do. Maybe I was afraid of what it would mean to say it out loud. You can hold something true inside yourself and still not have it be real. The moment you speak it, it becomes a different kind of thing. On the 4th day, I called my older son. I asked him to come over. He arrived on a Saturday morning. He brought his wife, which he often did. She sat in the living room while I took him into the kitchen and put the envelope on the table between us. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked up at me. I said, "Did you know about this?" He didn't say anything right away. He looked at the envelope again. Then he said, "Dad told us he wanted to explain things. He didn't want it to be a secret forever." I said, "But it was a secret from me." He didn't answer that. I asked him when his father had told him. He said 2019. The summer of 2019. The summer of 2019. They had gone on a fishing trip. Just Len and the boys, and Len had told them on the second night. He said their father had cried. He said it was the only time he had ever seen him cry as an adult. I sat with that for a moment. My husband had cried telling my sons about his affair. He had cried, and then they had all come home, and I had made dinner, and none of them had said a word. I asked him why he hadn't told me. He said, "Dad asked us not to." I said, "I'm your mother." He said, "I know." That was it. That was the whole conversation. I know. As if those 2 words were sufficient. As if they answered anything. I called my younger son that afternoon. He was harder. He got defensive almost immediately, started talking about how difficult it had been for him to carry it, how unfair it was that their father had put them in that position. He wasn't wrong about that last part. It had been unfair. Len had made them complicit without their full consent, burdening 2 grown men who loved their mother and didn't know what to do with something that wasn't theirs to carry. But there is a difference between being burdened with a secret and choosing to keep it for 4 years. There is a difference between being put in an impossible position and never once, in 4 years, picking up the phone. I told him that. I said it quietly without raising my voice. I told him I wasn't screaming, I wasn't accusing, I just needed him to understand what 4 years meant. I had spent 4 years having Sunday dinners with them. 4 years of birthdays and holidays and phone calls about nothing. 4 years of thinking we were honest with each other. He went quiet then. When he spoke again, his voice was different. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't known what to do. I believed him. I believed both of them, actually. I don't think either of my sons are bad men. I think they were young-ish men who were handed something terrible by their father and froze inside it. I think guilt works that way sometimes. It doesn't make you act, it makes you very still. But understanding something and forgiving it are not the same thing. I was 63 years old and I was learning that lesson all over again. My name is not on the deed to the house Len bought with Nadine Calloway. Our house, the house we lived in for 32 years, the house where I raised my sons, the house where I still slept every night on my side of the bed, that deed is in both our names. I had a lawyer check within the week. He said the property was mine. He said Len's half transferred to me automatically. He said the other house, the one 90 minutes away, was complicated and I could contest it if I chose to. I chose not to. I want to explain that decision because I know it might not make sense from the outside. A woman I had never met had spent 11 years with my husband. She had put her money into a house he helped her buy. She had her own grief now, I supposed, her own version of loss. I didn't know her. I didn't know what she knew about me. Whether Len had told her we were unhappy, or told her nothing at all, or told her something in between. I didn't know if she was a villain or just another person who had made choices inside something complicated. What I did know was that fighting her for a house I would never live in would cost me money and time and more of myself than I had left to spend. I was 63 years old and recently widowed, and I had just learned that my marriage was not what I believed it was. I did not have the energy to also become someone who fought over property in a town I had never visited. The lawyer seemed to think I was making a mistake. He said it in that careful lawyer way, all hedging and implication. I told him I understood my options. I want to tell you about the weeks that followed because they were not what I expected. I had expected grief. I had already been grieving. Len had been gone for nearly 6 weeks by the time I found the letter. But I had expected this new grief to be deeper, darker, a second floor below the first. What I found instead was something I don't have a clean word for. It was grief mixed with a kind of recalibration. Like when you've been reading a book and you reach a chapter that changes what you thought about everything that came before. You have to go back in your mind and reread. I went back through the years. 2003, when things had been quiet between us. 2007, when he'd started traveling for work more than usual. The conferences I had never attended. The phone calls he'd taken in the other room. I hadn't been suspicious. I had trusted him. But looking back, the shape of things had always been there. I just hadn't been looking. I don't know if that made it worse or better. I think both. My sister came to stay with me for 2 weeks in May. She didn't say much, which was exactly right. She cooked and did laundry and watched television with me in the evenings. On the last night before she left, she said, "You're going to be angrier later. When the shock wears off, there's going to be a lot of anger." She was right. The anger came in July. It arrived like weather. Suddenly, and without apology, I was furious for about 3 weeks. Furious at Len, furious at my sons, furious at the whole quiet, ordinary surface of my life that had been covering something I should have been allowed to know. Then the anger passed too. Things do pass if you let them. I started sorting the house in earnest that fall. Not to leave. I wasn't going anywhere. But because I needed to know what was mine. Not in a legal sense. I already knew that. But in a more basic sense. I needed to walk through every room and understand what I had built and what was real. I found things I'd forgotten. A box of letters I'd written to Len early in our marriage, before email, when he'd gone to visit his mother for a month, and we'd written almost every day. I sat on the bedroom floor and read them. I had been 24 years old. I had been so in love with him I could barely stand it. The girl in those letters was not foolish. She was in love, and that is not the same thing. She had loved someone real. The fact that that person had also been capable of this did not erase what she had felt. I put the letters back in the box. I found his fishing gear in the garage. I found the woodworking tools he'd used when the boys were young, when he'd built bookshelves for their rooms. I found the card I'd made him for his 40th birthday. Paper, hand-lettered, the boys had helped, tucked into the drawer of his workbench. He had kept it for 27 years. I don't know what to do with that. I've decided I don't need to. I see my sons regularly. We are careful with each other in a way we weren't before. There are things we don't say, and things we now say that we wouldn't have said a year ago. My older son brought it up once, a few months in, unprompted. He said he thought about it often. He said he wished he'd handled it differently. I said I wished he had too. We sat with that for a while. We ordered dinner. It was not a resolution, exactly, but it was honest. My younger son and I are slower. He is more like his father. He puts things in neat categories and doesn't like when they spill. What happened doesn't fit in a category. I think that's hard for him. We talk about other things, and sometimes I can see him working up to something and then choosing not to say it. I don't push. I've learned at 63 that some things take the time they take. A woman from my book club, one of the few people I've told, asked me once if I was bitter. She asked it gently, not unkindly. I thought about it for longer than she expected. I said no. Not because it didn't hurt, and not because I'd found some graceful peace with all of it, but because bitter means spending energy on the wound instead of on what comes next. I'm 63. I have, if I'm lucky, another 20 or 25 years. I spent 41 of them building something I thought was solid, and some of it turned out to be built on ground I didn't know about, but the years were still mine. The raising of my sons was real. The life I lived inside that house was something I chose. I bought a small notebook a few months ago. I write in it most evenings. Not a journal exactly. I've never been good at those, just notes. Things that happened, things I noticed, a bird on the fence post, a sentence I read that stuck. Some evenings I write about Len. Not about all of it, just the pieces I want to keep. There's more to keep than I expected. That surprised me most of all. I still make coffee the same way. Same pot, same ratio, same cup. I've had for 15 years with the small chip on the handle I keep meaning to replace. I still sleep on my side of the bed. Some mornings I wake up, and for about 4 seconds I don't remember any of it, and then I do, and I lie there and let it settle. Then I get up, I make the coffee. I sit by the window where the light comes in around 9 o'clock in a way I've always liked. And I think, this is still mine. All of this, the morning, the cup, the light, this belongs to me. Nobody gave it to me, and nobody can take it. I earned it by living through things. All of it, the good years, and the quiet years, and the year I found a letter in a red folder that reordered everything I thought I knew. It is enough. Most days, it is more than enough. Some days I even think he would have agreed if he'd had the courage to say so. But that was always Len's problem. He kept too many things in folders. He labeled everything but himself. I was the one who had to learn how to read what wasn't written down. I think I finally have. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. Not in a dramatic way, just quietly, the way you think about things when you're sitting by a window with a cup of coffee and nowhere urgent to be. Len made choices. That's the simple version. He made them over many years, in small increments, each one probably feeling manageable at the time. That's how it works, I think. Not one enormous decision, but 100 small ones, each building on the last until the whole structure is so far from where it started that you can't find your way back, even if you wanted to. He didn't set out to deceive me for 40 years. He set out to manage one uncomfortable truth, and then kept managing it, and the cost of that managing was paid mostly by me, without my knowledge or consent. That's the part I had to sit with, not the betrayal itself, though that was real and it hurt in ways I'm still finding, but the fact that his choices had consequences he never fully faced. He died before the letter was opened. He arranged it that way, I think, whether consciously or not. He confessed to our sons in 2019 and told himself the account was settled. But confessing to people who weren't wronged is not the same as being honest with the person you wronged. It's easier, it costs less. And Len, for all his quiet virtues, had a talent for the version of things that cost him less. I'm not saying this with hatred. I genuinely am not. What I've come to understand is that the shape of a person is more complicated than their worst act, and more complicated than their best one. Len built bookshelves for our sons when they were small. He kept a birthday card I made him for 27 years in a workbench drawer. He also kept a secret that dismantled my understanding of my own life. All of that is true at the same time. What matters to me now is what I do with the understanding, not what he did. I can't change that, but what I choose to build out of what's left. And I think that's where the real work is, for anyone who finds themselves standing in the wreckage of something they didn't choose. My sons are learning, slowly, what honesty costs when you defer it. My older one said something recently that stayed with me. He said carrying it had made him smaller. That's exactly right. Silence about hard things doesn't protect anyone. It just transfers the weight to different shoulders and makes everyone smaller in the carrying. I kept the house. I kept my mornings. I kept myself. And I think that's the thing worth saying to anyone who's been where I've been. What belongs to you cannot be taken by someone else's secrets, not permanently. It can be shaken. It can be turned sideways for a while. But the life you built with your own hands, the person you became through your own choices, that stays. Nobody's hidden deed can undo that. I'm 63 years old. I have a chipped coffee cup and a notebook I write in most evenings, and a window that gets good light at 9 in the morning. I have sons I'm still learning how to be honest with, and a sister who came when I needed her and didn't say too much. It is genuinely enough.